All right, guys. So today we're going to build off the ideas from the last lesson, and we're going to make methods a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit more useful. So today we are going to talk about parameters. Now, if you remember from the previous day, one of the issues with methods is that each method was self-contained, which means that if I create any variable within my main method, that variable would not exist within any of my unique methods, and vice versa. Now, this can be a problem sometimes because sometimes you do want a certain number or variable to go from your main to your method, or even from a method to another method. You are allowed to do this, you just have to be very specific with it. So not all of the variables will carry over to a method, but you are allowed to pick and choose which variables or numbers you would like to send. We call these your parameters. So if we look at this program right now, I'm going to run it and then we will talk about how it works. But essentially, I have a method which will print out the word hi a specific number of times. As you can see, I've already accessed this method and I've already printed out the word hi 5 times. Now, right now we're in the main method and it prompts the user to enter a value. If I enter the value 2, it's going to print out the word hi 2 times. Okay, now let's take a look as to how I did this. Now, I have a method called greeting. Now, the purpose of this method is to print out the word hi a certain number of times. The number of times you will print out the word hi depends on the parameter which it is accepting. So as you can see, these two parentheses, these two round brackets, which according to my previous lesson you should have left empty, we now have the option of filling it with a variable or a number. Any value or values, you can place multiple values simply by separating them with a comma, but any value or values which you send carry over to the method below and you can use them in the method. So as you can see over here, I send the number 5 down to the method, and if we look at the greeting method, you'll see that the parentheses next to greeting, which again were usually empty, are no longer empty. I am accepting the number 5 down here as the variable x. So, proper terminology, what you send down to a method is called the argument, and you accept that argument as a parameter. So argument and parameter are two words which are sometimes used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. The argument is the number or value, is the number or variable that you send down, and you accept it as a parameter. So what we're doing is we are essentially sending 5 down here, and we're accepting it as x. And you have to specify the data type because you're creating a new variable. And this variable is an integer, which is going to hold the number 5. So we start off our program by calling upon greeting, sending the argument 5, accepting this argument as the integer x, and then as you can see, we use x, this variable, within the greeting method. We use it as a bound for our for loop. Our for loop is going to run while I is less than x, which insinuates that since this for loop starts at 0 and increments by 1, this for loop is going to run x times. So if x is 5, this loop is going to run 5 times, and therefore print out the word hi 5 times. So essentially, we have created a method which prints out the word hi x times, where x is the parameter which is being accepted as an integer. Okay, so I start off this program by sending the argument 5, which is why in our output you notice that hi appeared 5 times at the beginning. I then prompt the user to enter a value between 1 and 10, and I allow them to input this number using keyboard as my scanner, which I really should call scan_n. So I just made that change real quick. Okay. Now, Notice that I placed this prompt to enter a value between 1 and 10 in a do-while loop. If you remember from the previous unit on loops, you can use do-while loops as what we call error handling. So I want to ensure that the user will input a value between 1 and 10. So I keep repeating this loop while they either input a number that is less than 1 or input a number that is greater than 10. In other words, if they don't input a number that is between 1 and 10, then I will ask them the same question again. Input a number between 1 and 10. And I'm going to continually repeat this do while loop as long as they keep not following my instructions. But the moment that they input a number between 1 and 10, this do while will be satisfied, or rather, this will come back as false, and I will exit it. Once I exit this loop, I will take the number that the user inputted, and I will call upon the greeting method again, printing out the word hi numbers of times, whatever the user inputted. So if I run this one more time, you'll see I call upon the method, but since I manually sent the number 5, hi will appear 5 times. Then back in my main, I will input a number between 1 and 10. Again, if I input the number 15, my error handling will proc and it will prompt me again to enter the value between 1 and 10. So if I input the number 10, I'm going to place this in the variable number, which is 10, and I am going to send that down as an argument to the greeting method, where I will print out the word hi 10 times. So again, the point of today's lesson is to allow you to take a variable or variables from the main method and send them down to your unique methods as parameters, where you would not normally be able to take or use any variables from external methods. Now, I mentioned briefly that you didn't necessarily have to send one variable or one number. You can send multiple values from your main to a unique method. All that you need to do is separate them by a comma. So let's say I wanted to send two values. I wanted to send a number and a string. So let's say I have over here a new string word, which we will call my name, Janicus. So not only am I going to send the number 5 down, but I am also going to send the word down. Okay? Now, right now, Java is angry. It's angry because the method greeting, as we can see down here, the method greeting cannot be applied to the given types. The method requires an integer, but it found an integer and a string. Well, what does this mean? Well, if you look down here at my method accepts one parameter, an integer, which we will call x. That needs to match up perfectly with any set of arguments that I send. So over here, when I call upon greeting, you'll see that I don't send one integer, I send an integer and a string. That doesn't match up with my parameters. So I need to change my parameters if I would like to accept this word. Okay, not only am I accepting an integer, but I am also accepting a string, which you can call whatever you want. You can even call it the same variable. Okay, so now Java is no longer angry up here because I am sending a integer, which will be placed inside of x, and I am sending a word, which will be placed inside of this variable, which I also called word. Now, I like to come up with different variable names. I'll call this name because it's my name. But technically, you can call the variable within your method and the variable outside of your method the same name. But keep in mind, those are two different variables that happen to have the same name. One exists in your main and one exists within your method. But again, to keep it less confusing, I usually like to create unique names. But it's up to you. Okay, so now within here, I can print out the variable name. Okay, so I'm just going to take this out. So I call upon my greeting. I send 5 down, which is x, which will be the number of times I print out high, and I send a word down, which I will simply print out from within my unique method. Okay, so let's just run that real quick. Oops, why are you appearing? Okay, I'm just going to comment out this the second section of my program, which takes the user input. We'll talk about that in a second. So if I run this, as you can see, 5 will be sent down as x. That's how many times I print out the word high. And this word will be sent down as a string, accepted as the variable name, and we will print it out. Now, just to tell you one more time, your arguments need to match up perfectly with your parameters, which means that if I even accidentally mess up these two values and I send the string first and the number second, the integer second, it's going to create an issue because what's going to happen is it's going to try matching up the word Janicus with an integer called x, and it's going to try matching up the number 5 with the string called name. And that's a problem because you cannot take the string Janicus and shove it inside of an integer variable. And that is why the error says incompatible types, sorry, string cannot be converted to integer because Java tried to automatically convert the word Janicus into an integer and it could not do that. Okay, so please keep in mind that your parameters and your arguments need to match perfectly. Okay, so one last thing and one last error that may appear in our program is down here, and this is the exact same error that happened before. We have adjusted our greetings method so that it accepts two parameters, an integer and a string. However, when I call upon that method down here, I am only sending an integer, which is the user inputted number. I would also need to send a string, which could be the name Alejandro. Right, and now it's not angry because my parameters match my arguments. Okay, an integer and then a string. So one more time, I send Janicus and 5. I print out Janicus and high 5 times. I input the number 3. I send Alejandro, which I manually sent, not with the variable. You can do both. I print out Alejandro and I print out the word high 3 times. So applying this to a more complicated, one last thing is you'll notice for form that my method header has changed slightly. Not only am I specifying the name of my method and a brief description, but I also have a line for my parameters. So I don't have a line for the parameter name because I have just recently added that, but I have a line that specifies at param x, and then a brief description of what the purpose of that parameter is. So I might want to add to my method header at param y name to be printed out. Okay, you'll notice that if you do this correctly, Java will automatically, for example, bold most of the words, and you'll see that the font slightly changes between different sections. For example, when I talk about my parameters x, x appears in a standard font, and then the description is in a lighter font. There's a reason it does that, and get into the form of doing this correctly so it appears as such, but this will become more relevant in the grade 12 course as to why you want to make your method headers exactly documentation with exactly this form. Okay, now applying this in a more complicated program, we have the exact same program as the last lesson with the chocolate shop, except this one doesn't start you with $20. It asks you how much money you start with. So let's say I start with $15. Then I have the exact same introductory I did before, and my money remaining is $15. How much would you like to purchase? Or sorry, what would you like to purchase? I'll purchase the kazoozles. And then this program actually counts my money down. Okay? Until I can no longer afford something and it will kick me out. Now, let's take a look about how this program differs from the one in the previous lesson. Looking at my main method, again, my main method is pretty simple. I start off by creating a scanner and asking the user how much money do they have, and they input that as a double because, money is allowed to have decimals. Now, the difference between this program and the previous one is that I include the money as a parameter. So the amount of money that I chose within the main method will be sent down to the purchase item method, where we will need that variable because we're subtracting each purchase off of my total money. So we first start off by accessing the main menu, which is the exact same as before, just a whole bunch of printout statements. And then my purchase item now accepts a double, which we call the variable money. Okay, so as you can see, the parameter money represents the initial money that they will have. And down here is the exact same program, except that we will keep repeating this loop while the cost that the user has accumulated is less than the amount of money which they had started with. Okay, and then I calculate the money remaining by taking their initial money and subtracting the cost of their current bill. So you will be using parameters quite often anytime that you need to take a variable from one method and carry it over to another method in which you are invoking. Again, let me know if you have any questions, and please make sure you are completing your homework.